A confused account of a failed crackdown. South Korean military described as ill-prepared in general's testimony. South Korea's military, an agent of terror and violence in the 1970s and 80s, spent decades scrupulously cleaning up its image to become what many people in the country came to regard as a modern and disciplined force. But that image was shattered on Thursday when the general who led a short-lived spasm of martial law this past week was grilled in Parliament. A rambling appearance that cast the military as poorly prepared and disorganized from the top down. We were not militarily prepared because it was put into action in such a hurry. General Park An-soo, the Army Chief of Staff, told the parliamentary hearing on Thursday there was confusion. His testimony was the first opportunity for lawmakers to question the military about the martial law order handed down on Tuesday night by President Yoon. The decree plunged the country into a political crisis, causing widespread anger that drove thousands of protesters onto the street. Mr. Yoon was forced to reverse course after just 6 hours. The one who is to blame the most is Yoon Sung-yeol, who made his military train its guns its own citizens. General Park insisted that he had not been involved in the planning. He told lawmakers he had been caught off guard, first learning of it when Mr. Yoon announced the extraordinary move on television. The military's follow-up announcement under its name banned all political activities and public rallies and asserted control over media outlets, among other steps. But in his account on Thursday, General Park claimed he had not read the order until his signature was requested. He described being at a loss over how to proceed as commander, unsure of what steps to take beyond trying to set up a new office. We were military people, some of us the best I know, General Park said of a meeting with the aides after he was made martial law commander. But we didn't know much about martial law. Time passed while we wondered, what should we do? His testimony was clearly aimed at rebutting the claim that the military had returned to its old brutal ways, but it appeared unlikely to ease any of the anger among protesters, some of whom lived through the traumatic era of military rule and were part of the popular uprising that ushered in South Korea's democracy. In the 1970s and 80s, the military used martial law to send troops into towns and college campuses to violently suppress anti-government protesters. Massacring hundreds, it censored the news media and hauled unfriendly journalists into torture dungeons. Army generals beat up lawmakers. South Koreans fought back with stones, firebombs, and large protest rallies. By the 1990s, the generals who had taken power through coups and bloodshed bloodshed were in prison on charges of mutiny. The military worked to clean up its image and vowed not to meddle in politics. Many South Koreans believed them. That's why footage broadcast on Tuesday night of helicopters dropping elite troops to take over the National Assembly deeply shocked the nation. Emblematic of the rage was the scene of a young woman grabbing a paratrooper's rifle barrel on Tuesday night at the assembly yelling, "Shame on you." The woman An Ki-ryung had rushed to the assembly after the martial law declaration to find the troops trying to force their way into the building to prevent lawmakers inside from voting to repeal the order. Citizens and parliamentary staff members were resisting the troops. I thought we had to stop them, no matter what, Ms. An, a spokesman of the main opposition Democratic Party, said in an interview. I thought if they broke in, we had no future. Ms. An, 35, grew up in a democratized South Korea. Her knowledge of martial law came from history textbooks and movies when some lawmakers at the inner party suggested that the deeply unpopular Mr. Yoon could deploy martial law to silence his critics. She said she wondered whether he might do it. When it actually happened, it felt not real. This happening in the 21st century South Korea, she said. There is a lot of blame for the military, but the one who is to blame the most is Yoon Sung-yeol, who made its military train its guns at its own citizens. The hearings on Thursday were an attempt to understand how and why that happened. The questioning lasted hours and appeared tense at times as lawmakers raised their voices in frustration. General Park told them he still did not know who had ordered the troops to storm the National Assembly, a striking claim from the man who was ostensibly their commander. When some lawmakers urged him to resign, General Park said he had already offered to do so. The country's Deputy Defense Minister Kim testified that the Defense Minister Kim had ordered in the troops, a move he said he had opposed. I'm sorry to the people for having been unable to prevent or stop it, he said. The defense minister, a former bodyguard of the president, resigned before the hearings and did not testify. In an interview with the New York Times, one opposition lawmaker, Park Sung-won, who had formerly served as a deputy chief of the National Intelligence Service, said that his bloc had received an advance tip about the military's movement. The notice gave lawmakers a head start to get to the National Assembly and conduct their vote to reject the martial law before the military could break in to stop them. The military's failed attempt to take over the assembly had been central to the opposition's argument that Mr. Yoon should be impeached for insurgency. Mr. Yoon had not been seen in public or made a public statement since the early hours of Wednesday. He insisted that martial law was necessary to protect the country from an extremely disruptive anti-state opposition that is said had paralyzed his government. The National Assembly was scheduled to vote on Saturday about whether to move forward with impeachment. Opposition lawmakers have a majority in the legislature, but an impeachment motion needs a two-thirds vote to pass. The opposition hoped to take advantage of mass demonstration scheduled for Saturday to create extra pressure as the vote is held. On Friday, Mr. Yoon was left increasingly isolated after the head of his party came out in support of impeaching the president, and the country's military said it would not follow any orders to reimpose martial law. In a surprise about face, the leader of the governing People Power Party said Mr. Yoon was unfit to lead South Korea after the short-lived martial law decree. I think that President Yoon should be suspended from office as soon as possible, said Han during an emergency party leadership meeting. It was not clear how many members of the party shared Mr. Han's view, but his comments increased the likelihood that the impeachment bill against Mr. Yoon would gain enough support to pass through the National Assembly. Mr. Han joined opposition lawmakers in warning that if Mr. Yoon were to stay in office, he might try to impose martial law again in a desperate attempt to hold on to power. In a powerful rebuttal to Mr. Yoon, the Defense Ministry said that even if he did, the military would not cooperate, and the country's Special Forces Command, which joined Mr. Yoon's martial law decree, said it would not join another. I want to make it clear that it will never happen, Lieutenant General Kwak Chung-kun said when asked about the possibility of another martial law attempt during an interview. He gave two opposition lawmakers that was broadcast live on YouTube on Friday. Even if I get such an order, I will reject it.